Do you love hiking, getting out in nature, exploring new places and looking for some inspiration? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Everyday Hiker podcast. My name is Beck and I'm your host. I live in the beautiful southeast Queensland region of Australia. And so many of the hiking ideas are featuring this area, but I'm also looking for travel inspiration for other places, plus special guests, practical tips and guides to hiking. And if you like what you hear, please follow me, share with your friends, rate my podcast, and of course, send me your feedback. Okay, welcome everyone. And today I'm absolutely delighted to have a special guest with me, Wes, who is going to talk about Mt Barney, which is a topic that I've been waiting to tackle and just wanted to do it the right way. So before we get into it, I just want to introduce Wes is a co-administrator of the very popular Take a Hike Queensland Facebook page. I find the page fantastic. If you're not a member, join now. I love to see what other people are up to, get advice from other people, get some inspiration from that Facebook page on all sorts of things, not just hikes, but gears. So thank you, Wes, for doing that, because it's a great resource for us hikers. And I know you're answering a lot of questions while you're on there. Thank you also to Shana, who is Wes's helper as well on that. Now, talking to Wes beforehand, for a start, he's Irish, so you're going to love his accent. Wes tells me that he has climbed Mt Barney up to maybe 100 times, which is pretty phenomenal. So firstly, welcome, Wes. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much, Beck. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I really was keen to talk to you and find out about your experience, because I know you're a really avid hiker. You were just mentioning as well Tasmania, a personal goal, 158 peaks. You've done 88 of them. We're going to have to do a Tasmania special based on that. But today we're going to talk about Mt Barney. And the reason I've left Mt Barney until now, because obviously it's one of the feature hikes in southeast Queensland, arguably the most challenging, one of the most challenging, is for that simple reason that everyday hiker, I really want to inspire people to just get out and not be intimidated by hiking. So Mt Barney might be something that you build up to aspire to. Some people might be ready for it now or are looking for a different way of doing it. And given that you've done it every which way, I'm sure you're going to provide that today. But I thought we'd kick off by just saying, tell me about, please, the very first time you climbed Mt Barney.
Okay. First time I climbed Barney, I actually went back through my notes, and I think it was. I had quite a large break in my hiking career. I hiked a lot when I was younger, as a teen. I was lucky enough to have a geography teacher, geography and history, who was big into the outdoors. Had many trips to the Himalayas, and I just found this to be fascinating. And his local area, which would have been like Barney to me now, was in Kerry. There's a place called the McGillicuddy Reeks, and it's a collection of mountains in Kerry, and the highest mountain in Ireland, Carrontoul, and he used to take us up there. I think I did it maybe 3 or 4 times with him, and then I started doing it on my own at weekends. So after that, moved to Australia in my 20s, and didn't hike, and then something like a big life change happened. I started hiking again, and very quickly, when you're living in southeast Queensland, Barney comes on your radar. I always wanted to do it. And there was just, I climbed Maroon in March of 2019, and I looked across the Barney and I was like, I can do that next, Didn't know much about it. And I took off with a friend of mine, and we went up Southeast Ridge as a first ascent. We were so scared doing it, because it seemed like there was much more exposure than anything I'd done before. And yeah, we went down South Ridge, down to Rum Jungle and down South Ridge, and it was a massive day. It took maybe 10 hours. Got lost loads of times. And from that moment on, I went back and said, I'm gonna try and aim to do it again, and not have it quite so dramatic. So it went from there, and as you progress, you learn bits and pieces more about the mountain.
Absolutely. So what kind of preparation? I mean, it doesn't sound like you'd done heaps maybe the first time. Did you have an app downloaded, or a map downloaded, I should say, rather than an app, or both, to help you with it, or did you just kind of follow the signs?
We did. The first trail app I heard about was Wikiloc, and I downloaded that, and there's some amazing, I suppose, guys that had recorded lots of trails in that area already that I really came to rely on. But I think when you're new to trail apps, you have a tendency to kind of look at them at every meter and not focus on picking up what's around you. And it was just, Barney's a great teacher. That's what I would say to anyone about Barney. The whole national park is an amazing teacher. I've hiked in places across the world, and I still go back to Mount Barney and the park in general because there's something for every difficulty. So yeah, it was WikiLoc for me. Was the app of trail app of choice.
Okay, that's a great observation, because I agree with you. All trails, and it's annoying because it tells you you're going off route, so then you spend all your time trying to get back on route where you might have needed to follow your nose a little bit more. So 10 hours, that's actually a pretty decent time for a first attempt. Do you think you were lucky with that, or because you said you got lost a bit? Lost.
Yeah. It was more questioning whether was this really the route. A lot of time we spent looking left and right, and then when you get to the top of East Peak, which is the most popular peak by far in the park, it's not the highest, but it's the most popular. You look down, and the trail notes I'd been given was there's a forest where Rum Jungle campsite is, and if you look down on the forest, there's two distinct colour greens where there's two different types of trees, and you just head for the middle. That's what we did, and it took us quite a while to get there. But once we got there, we knew we were okay. Then coming out on Peasants Ridge, as it's known.
And so 10 hours. What kind of time of day were you starting then?
I'm lucky. I work in construction, so to me, once the sun's up, I'm ready to hike. Yeah. And always have been. I always am a believer that you leave the sunlight towards the end of the day, where starting at 9 or 10 o'clock it's a no-go for Barney. That's the first thing you do. You start early.
Yeah, I think that's what I was getting to. You really need to get up there early, and so if you're travelling, you've got to account for that extra hour and a half as well to get down there. Did you contemplate camping? I'm assuming you've camped since at Mt Barney rather than just a day trip.
Yep. Sometimes when we're doing it, we'll camp in one of the local establishments, like private campsites. Otherwise, I'll just do a 2 o'clock in the morning drive down, which for some I wouldn't recommend because it can be quite committing. There's kangaroos and wildlife at night, but that's something we've done as well. Especially when we started doing it for sunrises and things, and wanting to be at the summit by sunrise it's basically a midnight start.
Yeah, so I was going to say, so even 2 a.m. might be a bit late for that. So yeah, midnight. And then you really need to know where you're going, don't you? Because so you mentioned that you went up the Southeast Ridge and came down Peasant Ridge, I think.
Yep.
On your first attempt.
I would say for most people, Southeast Ridge is if you've done other hikes leading up to it, Southeast Ridge is something that you could do because it's definitely the quickest way up. It wasn't the first route that was explored in Mount Barney. There's another ridge out the back called Midget's Ridge, and that was the original. If you look at some of the bushwalking clubs, old literature and books, that was the way that they carried materials up to build huts and such. And it just seems so crazy now because to do it now it's quite a difficult ridge. But,
yes. Yeah.
Some people elect to go South Ridge, up and down for their first time, also known as Peasants Ridge, and it is a scramble-free route largely, except for one or two little sections, but it's much longer because you're doing a big arc to get to the East Peak summit. Yeah.
So if it was your first attempt, though, and this is probably the safer, if not longer route to go, is that a fair summary?
It is.
Yeah. So and let's talk about then. You mentioned is it Midget's Ridge?
Midget's Ridge.
Yeah. So you've mentioned that because there's two peaks on Mount Barney, isn't there?
There is.
Yes.
There is.
So the other peak, the best way to get there?
Arguably the quickest way to get there, and probably the safest way to get there now, is again head up South Ridge until you get to the campsite, and then it's a semi-off track adventure for about an hour to get to that. Mostly because West Peak, which is I think it's 8 meters higher than East Peak, is it's just less hiked. It does suffer at the top or just at the summit. There's quite a lot of regrowth there, and it doesn't have the best. It has staggered views, whereas East Peak has just open, expansive view that everyone loves to sit and chat, and that's probably why East Peak is more popular.
Yeah.
But South Ridge would be the best way to get
Still
to
the best way to get up to West Peak as well. Yeah, and some people camp along the way. So some people will camp at Rum Jungle for that early start as well. Is that something you've tried, or camping on the mountain itself?
Yeah, I've camped in Rum Jungle many a time. It's quite a popular campsite, and its counterpart, Old Hut, which is just a couple of 100 metres away, which basically sits on the creek. That was where I mean, as the name would suggest, that's where the bushwalking hut, the different iterations of it were. It's gone now, but the pad is still an official campsite. Rum Jungle does suffer bush rats, and I've seen them unscrew milk cap bottles. They're quite good at finding your food, so you do need to take measures, either like hang your food off a tree, or I wouldn't recommend bringing any food into your tent, because they'll get in there and they'll put holes in your tent.
Yeah.
But it definitely is an option for people that just want to slow down.
Yep.
I mean, if you want to take 2 days climbing Mount Barney and be sure to get to the summit, you can bring your gear up, set up in Rum Jungle, and then with a smaller day pack, head up to the peak, which might take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half each way. And that's a guaranteed way of getting to the summit, pretty much.
Yeah, and that's what I've heard. So, but that's a national parks campsite, so you've got to book ahead, because I've heard of people who sort of rocked up there and thought, well, just set up camp. But like I said, it's popular, so you're not guaranteed a spot unless you're booking one. It's
probably the most popular high camp or bush camp, with the exception of the Lower Portals campsite, which is notorious for always being booked out. But yeah, Rum Jungle is probably the best campsite to attain a peak, I guess. There are other high peaks, but they're way more off track. And to be honest, when you're standing in them, you don't know you're in a campsite. It's one of those. Yeah. It's just a little flat spot.
It's a true bush camp. A space, a clearing, if you like. Yeah. But there's no real facilities at Rum Jungle, though. You've got to be pretty self-sufficient. Yeah,
self-sufficiency, definitely. There is water nearby in all but the driest conditions. Now,
water you've got to filter.
There's a lot of speculation. I always filter water in the park anyway, generally, because I mean there's farmland around in the low camps, especially animals, and then the problem with Rum Jungle is toileting. So a lot of people don't use best practice regarding toileting, and when you're so close to a water source, I'll always collect my water upstream of the campsite just to be safe. But that's just something to remember. That's
a good point. So let's talk about gear then. Let's start with safety gear, because Mount Barney is not for the faint-hearted. It really isn't. So anybody who thinks, I'll just, as you said, rock up at the car park at 9 a.m, climb up this peak and off I go, apart from the planning to make sure you've got the time to do it, what do you think are essentials for climbing Mount Barney?
Essentials first and foremost for me are, don't carry your fears, so don't carry too much. Leave early, have a light, have a snake bandage. Snake bandages, I love carrying tools that have multi-uses, and a snake bandage to me is so much more than a snake bandage. It's to splint your leg. I'll use it as a bandage. You can in an emergency you can use it to repair gear. If one of your pack straps goes, it'll get you down off the mountain. So I love carrying stuff like that. So that's something that always goes in the bag. Something that's has a lot of salt in it. I'm known for carrying a full stick of salami, because calories don't have to be clean; they just have to be calorific. Other than that, I mean, a lot of people say always carry a rain jacket. If it's 35 degrees and I'm climbing Barney, I won't bring a rain jacket. So it's situational.
Yeah, although having said that though, it is exposed.
It is exposed.
Climbing in the summer is going to require a bit of a different approach to maybe climbing in the winter, because we have such mild winter days. What about water? How much would you carry as opposed to collecting along the way? And
so, depending on what type of day that's planned, that's the first thing. Like, what's the plan of the day? If it's going to be a big long mission, I'll carry some extra water, maybe 3 to 4 litres. generally I'm 1.5 litres for the day, but again, I've done the mountain so many times, and we'll do quick sprints to try and get there as efficiently as possible, carrying light packs. But I would say for most people's needs, 3 to 4 litres. Have some electrolytes with you, and have plenty of calories with you.
Yeah, and salty food, like you said.
And there is, if you're doing that loop that we spoke about, so there is the ability to collect the water. You might need to have a filter with you of some kind. They're widely available. There's multiple filters. Any gear shop will try and sell you something that's extremely light and small.
Yeah. These days they're so great, aren't they? The screw-on cap ones. So, okay, let's talk shoes, because we did mention this beforehand, and you said, "Oh, that's a controversial topic," and it is, because everybody has their favourites. So Barney's not as scrambly as some other mountains, but you're still going to need fairly good soles that are going to be able to handle rock climbing, if you like, to get up to the top. So what do you wear most of the time?
Maybe 3 years ago I switched from, I was always a fan of wearing La Sportiva brand shoes, trail runners and approach shoes. But I did find as the brand came into new iterations of the same shoes, that the shoe got a bit too narrow for me. And I bought one pair of shoes, and it lasted me 11 days in Tasmania, and I was kind of, I'm going to look for something else. So
They're not cheap.
No, they're not. And I switched to Ultras, because that was all that was available in the store. I rushed into Hobart, went in to find your feet, and that's what fit me best. And I liked how wide they were at the front. And ever since, I've just stayed with Ultras. Now, they are a trail shoe rather than an approach shoe, so they will wear out a little bit quicker. But that's what I do. I treat shoes like it's just something that needs to be resupplied.
Yes. Yeah, and if you're doing the kind of climbing and walking that you're doing, you've got to expect, like a runner, a runner can go through 3 or 4 pairs of shoes a year when they're doing marathons. So that's not to mention the 3 or 4 pairs they've got current at any one time. So it's an expensive habit. It's probably the one thing you need to spend money on if you're going to regularly hike, isn't it? So
it is. It's definitely high on the list. Obviously, the gear that you purchase expands exponentially if you get into overnighting and stuff like that. But generally, your shoes are your biggest cost, for sure. Yeah. And it's a cheap hobby we all do by standards of some other hobbies. So I don't mind spending the money on them.
Yeah. It's a good thought though to keep regularly, making sure that they're in good condition and they're fit for purpose. Because have you ever done Barney in the rain or after rain and notice the different conditions? So let's talk about rain versus a sunny day versus a cold day, what you might be up against.
So many a time maybe only once or twice have I ever set out on a rainy day intentionally to just test gear and do it in bad weather. But many a time, because it's that elevation, you'll get lovely sunny weather all the way up, and the last 200 metres you'll be whiteouted. And that whiteout can drop the temperature by 10, 15 degrees. And sometimes the opposite happens, where you get a cloud inversion, where you're in cloud all the way up, and then you get to the 1100 metre mark and suddenly the clouds part. And so that's happened to me a good few times. That's where the benefit of maybe reading the weather apps, I'll always read multiple weather apps for the days coming up to when I think I'm going to be going down there. And you just get a feel for what, even when I'm driving in, I'll get a feel for what the lay of the national park looks like and what the weather is going to be for the day. But generally, you're going to get some moisture on some of the routes, particularly South Ridge. South Ridge is in the shade most of the time, so it's very slow to dry out.
So let's talk hiking poles, hindrance or help on Mount Barney.
For Barney, I would say almost in all cases a hindrance, unless they're foldable. It is a rough trail in most areas except in the lower areas, and that's of all the trails. The only exception to that would be Lower Portals and Cronin Creek Falls tracks. That's a track where you could utilise poles, but in both those instances there's not much continuous elevation, so how much a pole is going to aid you is questionable. And I am a pro pole person, but
because sometimes when you're going downhill quite steeply, they can be that hindrance, because a lot of people naturally will want to put a hand out, and if both hands are on a pole, it could actually be worse, because if you get the placement wrong, I mean, they could be slippery on the bottom of the poles as well. So that's why I was interested to hear whether you take poles. But
I would say if you're planning on doing a trip to Barney and you are a pole user in all of your hikes, I would consider having poles that you can split in half at least when you don't need them, or foldable poles. I've got a set of foldable poles and I find them so convenient.
Yes, same here. Yeah, or one pole so that you can keep a hand free, and yet another one for steadying yourself when you're coming down, because it's more about the descent than the ascent, isn't it? When you're heading up Mount Barney, you get these signs saying, don't go past unless you're an experienced hiker. This is the last point, turn back. You said right at the start, don't carry your fears with you. Do you think that puts some people off?
I would hope it would, but I don't think it does. I think if someone has got to the car park and put their shoes on and laced up their boots, they're committed. Yeah. And sometimes it can be a wise thing to have someone in the group that'll say, it's not on today, we're just going to turn around and go home.
Yeah.
There's one memorable occasion when I did do that, where I was meant to meet someone else in the car park and they cancelled on me, and I just turned around and went home. Yeah. I didn't elect to do a solo that day. But generally, the little core group I've built up, where everyone will be in the car park, we're solid.
Yes. And you mentioned right at the start that in terms of safety, the number one safety rule would be, particularly if it's your first time, to go with somebody who knows what they're doing. Don't do Mount Barney solo.
Don't do what I did. Exactly. It's true for most things. If you get shown something, we do it at work. We apprentice young minds. It's exactly the same in the mountains. It just eases your fears so much if someone's telling you this hole's a bit tricky up here, so if you put your hand here. I've done that many a time on Barney since with other people, and it generally just relaxes them so much to know that someone that knows the way is taking them to the top.
So that's probably going to be your number one tip for leave. Don't take all your fears with you. Is just take somebody who can help allay those fears a bit. So we had another rescue recently. What do you think the main thing people can get into trouble with Barney?
Accidents can happen. They can always happen. It's, as I said, it's a rough track. So a lot of people, I've met guys up there with broken limbs who managed to get themselves down. I've met guys up there with sprained fingers who managed to call a helicopter. Me personally, I think the biggest cause of accidents is people take prisoners. Someone really wants to do a hike and they're fully prepared to do it, but then they take someone else with them that isn't prepared at all, and that's the person that usually gets injured. That and just leaving too late, not being prepared. Yeah. Getting lost is a big one. Yeah. And in that instance, when you are lost, it can sometimes be better to sit still, because you can quite often get yourself into an even more terrible situation.
And do you take a PLB? That's kind of the buzz at the moment, isn't it? And obviously the prices come down on them, so it's made it a bit more affordable. But is that something personally you use, or do you take any other measures? Because you are hiking by yourself now. And we're talking about Barney today, but you were talking about Tasmania before, and that's a lot more remote.
Me personally, I've never used a PLB. Mm-hmm. And there's many reasons for that. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. For starters, I have one friend in particular, we always joke that, to push that button is a major thing. For me, just mentally, I'd really want to succumb to it. But with telephone technology now at the moment, I mean, Telstra have a new service out where I was in Tasmania over Christmas, and I was in a hut in the middle of nowhere, and I was able to text my partner, because they have that satellite messaging service for free as part of the service. And also because I know Barney well, I know where the reception is. There's reception in 90% of the roof with Telstra. Yeah. Don't quote me on that, because there are places where you won't get any reception, but even with that, the modern phones still have the ability to use an emergency call. Yeah. And people would say phones aren't as reliable, and that's fine, but if you're in a group and everyone has a phone, not every phone is going to break at the same time. So for me, that's good enough. Yeah.
And also, I think a good message to take out of that is to learn how to use the emergency call facility on your phone. because, and including myself, not everybody's familiar with it. They know that it's there, but not how to use it. So that could be something that's helpful to know as well if you're going out on these, more challenging hikes.
Definitely, and I would add to that, it's a much safer thing to be fully prepared to climb a mountain like that by building up to it and not being in a rush to get to the summit of the biggest, hardest mountain straight away. But just they're not going anywhere. The mountains aren't going anywhere. There's plenty of other peaks in Southeast Queensland that you can kind of work up to it, and you'll have a much better time doing it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Because we're all going out to enjoy nature, have a challenge, but one that's not scary or dangerous or ends in disaster. So you're better off doing something beforehand to get you to that point. Have you ever gone up without something? You mentioned the snake bandage, which is great. They're like $11 at Chemist Warehouse. Everybody should have one. But is there anything else that you've changed that you always have in your pack?
I used to be one for carrying a lot of layers, and probably to do with reading the current weather, I've definitely held back on. I keep forcing myself by buying smaller packs.
Yes.
So there's only so much I can get into.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, Tom Bohr, who was a guest on this podcast, he got me to get something that I think was the best $3 or $4 that I've ever spent, and that's one of the silver blankets, because at a bit of a poke, there's your jumper, there's your rain jacket, if things get really dire, and it weighs nothing and it packs down really small. But nothing else you've regretted not having that you always make sure you've got with you?
The biggest regret I always find is food envy at the summit, when someone else takes out something that you really want. The crack of a can of Coca-Cola or something is always something.
Yeah, that you wish you'd packed.
I have cooked steak and a full like English fry up on the summit a few times.
Yep.
That was hard earned, because you have to drag up all that extra weight.
Yeah, but incredibly satisfying, no doubt, when you were at the top.
Yeah, there's no better meal than a camp meal, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So you're standing on Mount Barney. Where's the absolute best view?
That's another contentious point. Okay, the best view for me is standing. I love standing on North Peak and looking around, or else standing on West Peak looking back to East Peak. But the absolute best view in the park is way out the back. There's a little less known peak called Double Peak, and I've only been there twice. I've only had a view once, and that, for me, that's the best view in the park.
Right, Double Peaks. So that's one, if you've done Mount Barney before.
It's not an easy peak to get to.
You need to be experienced to
Yes.
get there. Yeah, but one to maybe aspire to.
Actually, one other peak that's nearly as good is Montserrat. There's a campsite at Montserrat. I think it's a 6-person campsite, but quite often it's booked by one group. So if it's booked out, don't go there, because you're going to be there's nowhere for you to put your tent.
Yeah.
That's an awesome view as well.
So that's the one where you go up the 4-wheel drive track to the Upper Portals track.
That's it.
That's
correct.
Montserrat there. Yeah, so that's only 6-person.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, because that's a beautiful view up the top there as you're heading down to Upper Portals.
So when you get to the top of that 4-wheel drive track, that's Cleared Ridge, which is another bookable campsite, and that's pretty much the only drive-in campsite that's available in the park.
Yep.
And then when you leave there, it's all downhill to get to the Upper Portals, which has 2 more campsites. Hooped Pines, which is a lovely campsite, and then Yamara, which is another campsite by the Upper Portals. And from there, you'll head up to Montserrat.
Yes.
So
okay.
there's many parks and peaks out at that end that are very much less explored.
Yes, yeah, and beautiful. Yeah. Wes, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed hearing about your experiences with Mount Barney. Like I said, I'm so keen to get you back and talk Tasmania. I think we might have to wait until it gets a bit warmer, because there's no way we're picnicking in Tasmania in winter. Something that we plan for spring and summer for sure. But I appreciate your time. I also appreciate, like I said, the work you do answering people's questions and administering Take a Hike with Shana, because it's such a great resource, so please jump on. And that's it for today. Thank you again for being my guest.
Thanks very much, Beck. It was good to be on. And I'm an avid listener of the podcast. I know all things podcasts, so it's a great place to get information. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. And on that note, I will say thank you today for everyone listening. The notes from the routes that Wes has suggested, I'll put on the notes for this podcast episode. But once again, if you've got feedback, if you've got suggestions for future topics, let me know. And please, shout me out with your friends, with a like. Every bit helps to keep it going. So thank you. And until next time, happy hiking.